John had been living on the space station for months, working as a mechanic. The job was easy, routine, and kept him busy. There were no major issues. The station was quiet, floating in the middle of space near an uncharted planet, far from any major conflicts. It was the perfect place for someone like him to live a peaceful life. But everything changed one day when John noticed something strange on the station's monitor. A small ship was drifting toward the station. It didn't appear on any of the charts, and it wasn't sending any signals. No one had reported a ship missing. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. John was curious, so he quickly went to the station's observation deck. He stared out at the ship, which was now dangerously close. It was small, damaged, and clearly in trouble. He watched as it floated closer to the station, its engine sputtering. Something was wrong. Someone needed help. With his heart pounding in his chest, John quickly suited up in his spacesuit and grabbed his tools. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he couldn't ignore the situation. He made his way to the docking bay, where the small ship was struggling to stay in orbit. The ship was barely holding together, its hull cracked and dented. John opened the airlock and stepped into the ship. The inside was dark, except for a few flickering lights. His boots clanked on the metal floor as he moved through the narrow corridors. The ship smelled strange, a mix of dust and something he couldn't quite identify. He followed the faint sound of breathing. It was weak, but it was there. As he rounded a corner, he found her, a small alien girl, no taller than a child, lay crumpled on the floor. Her skin was a pale, soft shade of blue, and her large, dark eyes were filled with fear. She was hurt badly. Her clothes were torn, and there were cuts and bruises on her arms and face. She was trembling, barely able to keep her eyes open. John knelt beside her, his heart racing. She looked so fragile, so alone. He reached out a hand, not knowing if she would accept it, but desperate to help. To his surprise, the girl's eyes locked onto his, and she reached out, her small hand grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "It's okay," John whispered, though he wasn't sure if she understood. "I'm here to help you." The girl didn't respond with words, but the way she held onto him told him everything he needed to know. She needed him, and for some reason, she trusted him, even though she was clearly scared. John carefully helped her sit up, trying not to hurt her further. Her breathing was shallow, and she winced every time she moved. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to recognize that she needed medical attention immediately. "Hold on," he said softly. "I'll get you some help." He gently lifted her into his arms, her small body light but trembling. He carried her back to the station, moving quickly but carefully. Once back in the station's med bay, John laid her down on one of the beds, his mind racing as he tried to think of what to do next. He ran to the medical supplies and gathered what he thought he might need. There were bandages, painkillers, and a basic healing kit. As he worked to clean and dress her wounds, he noticed how small she was, how delicate her features were. Her skin was soft, almost like silk, and her hair, though messy, was long and silver. Despite her injuries, she was beautiful. But her eyes, those large, dark eyes, were full of fear and sadness. John couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. Where had she come from? Why was she alone? As he worked, the girl remained mostly silent, her grip on his hand never loosening. It was as if she was afraid that if she let go, she would be lost again. John didn't mind. He had no idea why, but he felt an overwhelming need to protect her. Once her wounds were dressed, John sat beside her, watching her sleep. She was so small, yet the feeling of responsibility that washed over him was so big. He had no idea what kind of trouble she had gotten into, but one thing was clear: she was in danger. And now, so was he. After a while, the girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She seemed disoriented at first, but when she saw him sitting beside her, she reached out for him, her small fingers weakly grasping his hand. "Hey, you're okay," John said, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're safe here." The girl didn't speak. She just clung to him, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. John was taken aback. It wasn't just the physical pain she had endured. There was something deeper in her eyes, of fear of being abandoned, of being alone in this vast, empty universe. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised her. "I'll stay with you for a moment." He wasn't sure what else to say. He wasn't used to being in situations like this, helping an injured alien girl in the middle of space, with no idea how she got here or what to do next. But despite all the unknowns, one thing was certain: John couldn't leave her. Not now. Not when she had nowhere else to turn. He could feel the weight of the promise he had just made to her. The weight of knowing that from this point forward, his life would never be the same. And somehow, he knew that this tiny alien girl wouldn't let go of him. Not ever. The next few days were a blur for John. The tiny alien girl, whom he had started calling Mira, slowly recovered from her injuries. He had done the best he could to care for her. But the healing process wasn't easy. Her body seemed fragile, as if it had been pushed to its limits by whatever terrible ordeal she had faced. Before crashing onto his station, Mira didn't speak at first, and John didn't know if it was because of her injuries or because she couldn't communicate in a language he understood. He had tried speaking to her, but she only looked at him with those large, dark eyes, as if trying to make sense of him. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, a kind of emptiness that made John feel more protective than ever. The days passed slowly as John took care of her. Mira would rest most of the time, her small body curled up in the medbay, her tiny hands still clinging to his whenever she woke. At first, John felt strange, unsure of what to do. He wasn't used to having someone, let alone an alien being, rely on him so completely. But every time he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, he couldn't help but feel a strange bond forming between them. It was during one of these quiet moments that Mira made her first real attempt at communication. She had been staring out of the window at the stars for hours, her face soft with wonder. She seemed fascinated by the view of the galaxy that stretched out before her. John had never seen anyone so captivated by something so familiar. "Do you like the stars?" John asked, sitting beside her. Mira turned her head slowly, looking up at him for a moment before giving a faint nod. She was still too weak to speak, but her body language said more than words ever could. John smiled gently. "I know they're beautiful, aren't they?" She looked at him again, her eyes filled with questions. It was clear she wanted to understand. But how could he explain what was happening to her? She was far from home, hurt, and alone. She needed answers, but John didn't have any. All he had was his promise to protect her, no matter what. He stood up and walked over to the control panel, flipping a few switches to bring up the data from the ship that had crashed. He had been trying to learn more about the ship's origins and Mira's species, but everything was in a language he didn't recognize. The ship's logs were corrupted, and the only thing that seemed clear was the distress signal that had led him to Mira. "Do you remember anything?" John asked, his voice gentle as he turned back toward Mira. She shook her head slowly, her long silver hair falling around her face as she did. Mira looked lost, and John knew there was more to her story than she was letting on. The problem was, she couldn't or wouldn't speak about it. For a long time, they simply sat in silence. Mira's hand remained on John's, and he didn't mind. He had grown used to the small, comforting weight of her hand in his. He knew he couldn't ask her to talk about her past if she wasn't ready. The fear in her eyes made it clear that she wasn't ready to share what had happened to her. But John could feel that something dark and dangerous was following her, something that had left her with scars deeper than the ones on her body. The days turned into weeks, and John continued to care for Mira. He did what he could to make her feel safe, to make her feel at home in a place that wasn't hers. But there was only so much he could do. He wasn't a doctor, and there were limits to how much he could heal. Then one day, as Mira sat on the couch, staring at the control panel, she did something John didn't expect. She raised her hand, slowly, and pointed at one of the maps on the screen. The map was a star chart, one that John had been using to track their position in the galaxy. "Where are we?" Mira asked in a soft voice, her words strained but clear. John froze. his heart skipping a beat. He had never heard her speak before, not in words that he could understand. Her voice was small, fragile, but there was a determination behind it. She was trying to reach out, trying to communicate. "We're near a place called Luma Station," John said, a smile forming on his face at her first attempt to speak. "It's a peaceful place, but you're safe here. You don't need to worry about anyone hurting you." Mira looked at the map, then back at him. She wasn't convinced. The fear in her eyes was still there, deep and hidden, but it was still very much present. It was clear that she was far from trusting the situation. She was still processing everything that had happened. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Coming for me." John's heart sank. He had feared that question would come. He had been wondering the same thing. "I don't know," he admitted, sitting down beside her. "But I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Mira's small hand squeezed his tighter, as if to confirm that she still trusted him. She didn't say anything more. But in that moment, John understood something crucial. Mira wasn't just running from something. She was running towards something toward him. She needed him, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he needed her. To dot as the days passed, Mira's condition improved slowly. She still needed constant care, but she was stronger now and more willing to interact with John. Her bond with him deepened, and John found himself feeling protective of her in ways he hadn't expected. She was small, fragile, and afraid, but she was also incredibly brave. The more he learned about her, the more he realized that she wasn't just a helpless alien girl. She was someone who had been through something unimaginable, and whatever it wasn't over. John knew that he couldn't keep hiding on this station forever. Sooner or later, the truth would catch up with them. But for now, all he could do was keep her safe and try to help her heal. And somehow, as the days turned into weeks, he found that he wasn't just protecting her. He was starting to care for her in a way that went beyond responsibility. She had become more than just a wounded stranger to him. She was someone he couldn't imagine being without, for now, though. John and Mira would take things one day at a time, together. Days passed, and life on the space station felt more like a strange, peaceful dream than reality. Mira's health was improving steadily, but her fear never fully left her. It was clear that her past haunted her, even in her quiet moments of rest. John did everything he could to make her feel safe, but deep down, he knew there was something dangerous that she wasn't telling him. Mira's trust in him grew stronger each day. She followed John around the station, always within arm's reach, her small figure never too far behind. She didn't speak much, but there was a sense of comfort in her presence. It was as if they had become a team without even realizing it. Still, John couldn't shake the feeling that danger was lurking just beyond the horizon. One afternoon, as John worked on a routine repair in the station's control room, an alarm suddenly blared, shaking the calm of the station. Mira, who had been sitting quietly nearby, jumped to her feet in alarm. John turned quickly to the console, his eyes widening as a flashing red warning appeared on the screen. It was a ship, an unidentified vessel heading straight toward them. The ship was large, much bigger than any civilian ship John had seen before. It didn't have the markings of any known species or fleet, and the ship's approach was too precise to be a simple mistake. This wasn't an accident. Someone was coming for them. "Mira," John called, hurrying to her side. She was already looking at him with wide eyes, her small frame tense with fear. "You need to hide. We don't know who this is." But Mira didn't move. Her eyes locked onto the screen, her expression darkening. She didn't speak, but John could see the fear in her face. Whatever was coming, she knew more about it than she was letting on. "Mira, we have to leave," John urged, grabbing her gently by the arm. "We can't stay here." For a moment, Mira didn't react. Then, as if she had made a decision, she shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're here for me." John's heart sank. He had feared this moment. The enemies from Mira's past had finally found her. "They've been tracking me," she continued, her voice trembling. "I am not safe." John's grip on her arm tightened. we'll leave. We can outrun them." Mira's eyes flickered toward the control panel, and for a second, John thought she was going to give up. But then, to his surprise, she stepped back and turned toward the rear of the room. "Get to the ship," she said quickly. "I'll buy us some time." John didn't fully understand what she meant, but he trusted her. He didn't have time to question her, so he rushed to the docking bay, his heart racing. Mira followed him, her small figure determined, despite the fear that was still evident in her eyes. As they reached the ship, John quickly started the launch sequence. The ship's engines roared to life, and the hatch began to close, but before it fully sealed, John heard Mira's voice one last time. "I have to do this," she said, looking at him with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I won't let them hurt you." John's heart ached as he watched her step back from the ship. "No, Mira, we leave together." He shouted, but she shook her head. "You have to go. Please." She took a step back. "I'm not the only one they're after. They'll follow us, but if I stay, they'll focus on me." John hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to bring her with him, but deep down, he knew she was right. She was the key to whatever danger was chasing them. "Mira," John whispered, his voice filled with worry. "I'll be fine," she said firmly, her voice steady now. "You need to leave before they find you." John swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he made a final decision. "I'm not leaving without you." Before he could argue further, the door to the docking bay slammed shut, sealing him inside the ship. Mira stood on the other side, her figure now a silhouette against the darkening sky outside. John stared at her for a long moment, his heart breaking. He didn't want to leave her behind, but he also didn't want to put her in more danger. With a deep breath, he turned to the controls and slammed his fist on the engine switch, powering the ship's engines. The ship began to lift off the ground, the sound of its thrusters drowning out everything else. As the ship broke free from the station, John glanced back out the small window. Mira stood on the platform, watching him go. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She just watched, her expression unreadable. John's heart ached, but he couldn't look back. He had to trust her. Mira had made her choice, and he had to make his. But he promised himself one thing. He would not leave her behind. He would return. He would find her again, no matter what it took. As the stars stretched out before him, the weight of the situation settled in. He was in the dark, heading into unknown territory, with no idea what awaited them. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just about protecting Mira anymore. It was about finding her past, uncovering the truth, and facing whatever darkness was hunting them both, and he would never give up until he brought her back safely. The stars outside the ship were a blur as John sped through the galaxy, his mind racing. Mira's face, the way she had stood at the station, watching him leave, was etched into his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Her decision had been made, and as much as he hated it, he knew she was right. She had to stay behind to protect him, to protect them both. But as John piloted the ship through the vast emptiness of space, a gnawing feeling of helplessness filled him. He couldn't just leave her behind. He had promised to keep her safe, and yet he was flying away, leaving her to face danger alone. He wasn't sure how much time passed before the ship's sensors beeped urgently. It was a warning: another ship, fast approaching. But this wasn't just any ship. This was different. John's eyes widened as the readout flashed a familiar symbol. The ship that had been chasing Mira had found them. The enemy was closing in. John's hands tightened around the controls. He knew he couldn't outrun them. The ship was too slow, and the enemy's vessel was faster, more advanced, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. His mind raced for a plan, anything that would keep them safe. He glanced at the weapons system on the console. There were a few basic defense systems, but nothing that could stand up to a ship like the one pursuing them. He needed more time. Time to think. Time to make sure Mira was safe. John activated the ship's cloaking device, hoping that the sudden disappearance would throw off the enemy's sensors. He knew it wouldn't last long, but it was the only chance he had. He cut all non-essential systems to save power, keeping the ship as quiet and hidden as possible. The tension in the cockpit was thick. John's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the empty space ahead. He was running out of options. The ship's cloaking device flickered on, and for a moment, it felt as though the whole world had gone still. But just as he thought they might have escaped, a series of warning lights flashed on the control panel. The enemy was getting closer. The enemy's ship had found them. John didn't waste any more time. He pressed a few buttons, sending a burst of power to the ship's engines. It was a risky move, but it would buy him a few extra seconds. He needed to think of something, anything, that could give them the upper hand. Suddenly, a voice crackled. Over the ship's communication system, John froze. "Human ship, you have been located. Surrender immediately, or we will open fire." John's heart sank. He didn't know what they wanted, but he had no intention of surrendering. They had come for Mira, and he wasn't going to let them take her. He pushed the ship to its limits, maneuvering it through the stars, trying to stay ahead of the enemy. The enemy ship was right behind them now, its weapons locked onto John's ship. It was only a matter of time before they fired. John's pulse quickened. He had to do something. He had to protect her. Suddenly, Mira's face appeared in his mind. She had trusted him. She had stayed behind to protect him, and now it was his turn to protect her. No matter what happened, he couldn't let them catch him. He had to fight back. He turned the ship's weapons on. The small, weak guns on his vessel flared to life as he fired at the pursuing enemy ship. The blast struck the ship's shields, causing a bright flash, but the damage was minimal. The enemy returned fire, and John swerved to avoid the blast. He could feel the heat of the enemy's weapons grazing the hull of his ship. His heart was pounding in his chest. The fear was palpable. He had no idea how long they could keep this up. The enemy's ship was stronger, more powerful than anything he had. But he wasn't going to stop. His fingers danced over the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. He pulled a risky move, sending the ship into a series of twists and turns that made it harder for the enemy to lock onto him. The enemy fired again, but John narrowly avoided the blast. Time was running out. He had to make it to the nearby planet before the enemy could catch him. "Come on," he muttered under his breath as he focused on the controls. In the distance, a planet appeared, a small, rocky world on the edge of a nearby star system. It was their best chance, and it wasn't much of a chance at all. He aimed the ship directly toward the planet, using the last of his energy to power the engines. The enemy followed closely behind, still firing at his ship. John's stomach churned as the ship plunged toward the planet. The atmosphere was thick with clouds, but John could see an opening, a small valley where he might be able to land and hide. He banked the ship hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the last of the enemy's shots. The ship's systems were failing, and the engines were overheating. It was all or nothing. The ship jerked violently as the landing gear hit the ground. John quickly shut down the engines, but the ship skidded across the rocky surface, coming to a sudden stop in a cloud of dust and debris. The ship's alarms rang loudly in John's ears, but he didn't wait for the system to tell him what he already knew. He had to get out of there. He grabbed his emergency pack, shoved it under his arm, and unstrapped himself from the seat. Before he could move, the ship's hatch opened, and he jumped out, running as fast as he could. The landscape was rocky and uneven, but John didn't care. He had to get away from the ship before the enemy could catch up. His breath came in heavy gasps as he ran through the wilderness of the planet. The sky was darkening, and the sound of the enemy ship's engines echoed in the distance. They weren't far behind. John turned the corner and spotted a small cave in the side of a mountain. He headed toward it, hoping it would provide them with some cover. But as he entered the cave, he heard a voice calling out, "Mira?" He stopped dead in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. "Mira?" He called out again, his voice trembling. A small figure emerged from the shadows, and John couldn't believe his eyes. Mira stood there, unharmed, her eyes wide with relief. She had somehow found him. "John," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I knew you would come for me." John rushed toward her, his heart racing. "I'm not leaving you behind again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The two of them stood together in the dim light of the cave, knowing that their fight was far from over. But for the first time since the chase began, John felt a sense of hope. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was she. The cave was cold and dark, the air thick with dust as John and Mira took shelter. They had been running for hours, their hearts still racing from the chase. John couldn't believe that Mira had found him, but here she was, standing before him. Unharmed and calm, he had expected the worst. But Mira had an uncanny way of keeping her composure even in the most dangerous situations. She had always been brave, but now, standing in front of him, John saw something more. There was something different about her now, something that had changed since they had first met. As they sat down inside the cave, John couldn't stop staring at her. She was no longer the frightened, fragile girl he had found on the ship. There was a strength in her now, an inner strength that seemed to shine through her small frame. "I'm glad you're okay," John said softly, his voice full of relief. He couldn't imagine what he would have done if something had happened to her. Mira smiled faintly. "I told you I would be fine," she replied, her voice steady. "I've been through worse." John nodded. But the weight of the situation pressed on him. They had outrun the enemy for now. But how long could they keep running? And why was Mira so calm in the face of danger? He had seen her fear when they first met, but now, it was as if she had accepted her fate. "There's something you need to know," Mira said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. John looked at her, his heart sinking. He knew there was more to her story than she had let on. He had always suspected it, but now he was certain. Mira wasn't just any alien girl. She had secrets, and those secrets were dangerous. "I'm listening," John said, his voice soft but serious. Mira took a deep breath, her small hands trembling slightly. "I wasn't just running from the enemy. I've been running from them for a long time. My people, they're not what you think. I'm not just some lost child. I'm the key to something bigger, something that could change the galaxy." John stared at her, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Mira's eyes darkened, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "The enemy isn't just after me because of my species. They want me because I'm different. I have powers that were hidden, even from me, until recently." John's mind spun. "Powers? What kind of powers?" Mira's gaze shifted to the ground. "I can manipulate energy. It's something my people never wanted me to know about. They hid it from me, made sure I didn't use it. But now I can feel it inside me. The power is growing, and I can't control it." John's heart raced as he absorbed her words. She was no ordinary alien girl. She was powerful, and that power was why the enemy was after her. "Mira, why didn't you tell me this before?" John asked, his voice full of concern. "I didn't know how," she replied, her voice small. "I didn't understand it myself. But now, I can feel it. The enemy is getting closer because they know I've started to unlock it. And if they get their hands on me, they will use my power to destroy everything." John's mind raced as he processed what she was saying. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. They weren't just running from the enemy. They were running from something much darker, something that could affect the fate of the entire galaxy. "But why didn't you tell me?" John repeated, his voice quieter now. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" Mira's eyes flickered. "With guilt, I didn't want to put you in danger. I thought I could handle it alone. But I was wrong. I was so scared." John sat beside her, his heart heavy with emotion. He had promised to protect her, but now he realized that there was so much more at stake than just her safety. She was more than just a girl he had found on a ship. She was a key player in something far bigger, something he didn't fully understand. "I'm here for you, Mira," John said softly, placing his hand on hers. "I don't care what power you have. We'll figure this out together." Mira looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. "I don't want to be a weapon. I don't want to hurt anyone. You won't have to." John reassured her, his voice steady. "We'll find a way to stop them before they can use you. I won't let them take you." But as he spoke those words, a sharp sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Faint at first, but growing louder. John's heart stopped. They weren't alone anymore. Mira's eyes widened. They found us. John sprang to his feet, his mind racing. He grabbed his blaster from his pack and turned toward the entrance of the cave. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the walls. Whoever was out there, they weren't here to talk. Get back, John whispered to Mira, pushing her further into the cave. Stay hidden, Mira nodded. But her face was filled with determination. I'm not hiding anymore, she said, firmly. Before John could protest, the first figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. A tall alien, dressed in dark armor, stood there, his face hidden behind a helmet. He wasn't alone. More figures emerged behind him, their weapons drawn. John's heart raced. These weren't the same soldiers who had chased them before. These were different, more dangerous. John, Mira whispered, her voice shaking. They've come for me. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. You can't hide from us forever, girl. We have come for what's ours. John's grip tightened round the blaster. You'll have to go through me first. Mira stepped forward, her small frame standing tall in front of John. No, she said, her voice steady. This ends now. A surge of energy crackled through the air. Mira's eyes glowed faintly, and suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook. The energy she had been hiding for so long had erupted, and for the first time, John saw the full extent of her power. She wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. The enemy soldiers took a step back, fear flashing in their eyes. But the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The cave was alive with energy. The ground beneath John's feet shook as Mira's power surged. Her eyes glowing brighter, she stood at the entrance, her small frame radiating with an aura of pure energy. John had never seen anything like it. Mira wasn't just a frightened alien girl anymore. She was a force of nature, and he could see the fear in the eyes of the soldiers who had come for her. The leader of the group, still standing at the mouth of the cave, raised his hand, signaling for the others to hold back. He wasn't sure how to handle the sudden display of power, but John wasn't about to wait for them to figure it out. Get down, John shouted to Mira, pulling her behind him. But Mira didn't move. She stayed where she was, her feet firmly planted, her eyes locked on the enemy. They're here for me, she said, her voice soft but filled with resolve. I won't let them take me. John's heart raced. He had always known she was important, but now, as he saw the full extent of her power, he understood just how much the galaxy would pay attention to her. She wasn't just a target anymore. She was a weapon, and everyone wanted to control her. The leader of the enemy soldiers stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. You cannot escape your fate, child, he said, his voice low and cold. The galaxy belongs to those who are strong, and you are not strong enough to fight us. Mira didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her hands raised, and the air around her shimmered with energy. For a moment, John thought the ground would crack open. Mira's power was raw, untamed, and it was growing with every passing second. I am strong enough, Mira said, her voice unwavering. The soldiers hesitated. They had not expected this. They had come to take her, to bring her back to their masters, but now they were unsure. Mira had something they couldn't control, and they knew it, but it was too late to back down now. Mira, please, John said, his voice filled with fear for her. You don't have to do this. We can still run. We can still get away. But Mira shook her head. No, John, I can't keep running. I have to fight, for myself, for everyone. John felt a pang in his chest. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe. But Mira was right. They couldn't keep running forever. This was the moment when everything changed. Without warning, the enemy soldiers charged forward, their weapons raised. Mira's power erupted, and in an instant, the ground beneath them cracked. A blast of energy shot out, knocking the soldiers back. They staggered, surprised by the sheer force of it. But they weren't defeated yet. Attack, the leader shouted, his voice filled with fury. The soldiers regrouped, advancing on Mira, their weapons glowing with energy. John's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the chaos unfold. Mira was powerful, yes, but she was still just a small alien girl, and these soldiers were trained warriors. They wouldn't go down easily. John gripped his blaster tightly, ready to fight. He couldn't let them take Mira, not after everything they had been through. He raised the blaster and fired at the closest soldier. The shot hit its target, knocking the soldier off his feet. But there were too many, and they were too powerful. Mira, John shouted, his voice desperate. We need to get out of here. But Mira didn't hear him. She was surrounded by a crackling energy field, her eyes glowing brighter with each passing second. She raised her hands, and the air around her hummed with power. She was about to do something that John didn't fully understand, but he could feel it in his bones. Whatever it was their only chance. The soldiers attacked again, but this time Mira didn't hesitate. She released a burst of energy so strong that it sent the soldiers flying, crashing into the walls of the cave. John could feel the ground tremble beneath him as Mira unleashed everything she had. The air was thick with energy, the atmosphere charged with raw power. John watched in awe as Mira stood at the center of the chaos, her energy field expanding. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her freedom, for her right to exist without fear. The soldiers struggled to stand, their armor damaged, their weapons disabled. They weren't ready for this kind of battle. They had underestimated Mira, and now they were paying the price. But the leader wasn't done yet. He raised his hand, calling for reinforcements. This is not over, he shouted. We will not lose to a child. Mira's eyes narrowed, and the energy around her intensified. She wasn't going to let them take her again. She wasn't going to let them take anyone. You don't understand, she said, her voice steady and powerful. This ends now, with a final, deafening burst of energy. Mira sent the remaining soldiers flying. The leader staggered back, his face twisted with rage. He had come for her, but now, he was nothing more than a victim of her power. John couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mira had done it. She had taken control, not just of the battle, but of her own destiny. The soldiers were defeated, lying unconscious on the ground, and the leader was on his knees. Defeated, John walked slowly toward Mira, his heart still racing. Mira, you did it, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Mira turned to him, her eyes still glowing but softening as she looked at him. I had to, she said quietly. I couldn't let them control me anymore. I'm not just a weapon. John nodded, his heart swelling with pride. Mira wasn't just an alien girl he had saved from danger. She was a hero in her own right. And now, she was free. For the first time, Mira smiled. It wasn't a smile of fear or sadness. It was a smile of victory. She had faced her enemies, her fears, and she had won. We're not running anymore, John, she said, her voice steady and calm. We're fighting. Together. John reached out, taking her hand in his. Together. They had faced the storm, and together, they had won. And as they stood there, amidst the wreckage of the battle they had just fought, John knew one thing for sure. No matter what came next, he and Mira would face it together.